probably doesn't need introduction, so first of all, thank you very much for coming to the Slade. So Richard is a great British sculptor who has been making work and exhibiting in the UK and internationally for 40 years now. So yeah, I'll just let him introduce and speak about his own work. But thank you very much for coming to the Slade.
Thank you. If I have to introduce myself, I say I'm not cheap, but I'm slow. This is 2050. I'm starting this point because I think it's something that, or it's a piece of work that most of you here, if you've not seen it, you've heard about. It is my party piece. And all it is a room filled with car oil. All I've made is the tank that it sits in and the corridor, but all you're looking at as an audience will be the room. But the room has been transformed in some way, it's been expanded. If you think of the idea of the TARDIS, you go into a police box and it's twice the size inside. That spatial conundrum was a kind of a link to an idea that I wanted to try and achieve in some way. And of course, like a magician's sleight of hand, this is a not conjuring trick, but this is a sort of a sense of optical illusion or magic trick. The room is actually not half full, but filled to the waist, so a good deal of the space is lost to the sculpture or the installation. But of course, looking down at windows, looking out to the sky, suffering vertigo, etc., are all part and parcel of what made this piece of work great. It also was quite an interesting work because it achieved something that's been quite difficult with other works, and other artists have found a similar thing, which is anybody can get it. I mean, that's not to say they understand what's going on, but anyone who's not had an art vocabulary can go wow about this because they're moved in some kind of way. And that's what's really brilliant. It's like pop art, it's land art, it's minimalism, covers all the genres, and all it is a material that isn't really on sculptors' vocabulary of materials. It's a hazardous waste material. You'd be arrested for pouring that down the drain. And yet you get people talking about that in terms of beauty, which is quite interesting. As I said, it's a completely psychological piece. People can't quite work out what's going on. It's as if the floor's been taken away. And of course, it's been written about as being a site-specific work. It ain't. It can go anywhere if I choose to do it. It's been built 9 times. This one doesn't go back in the box and get taken elsewhere, you just build another one. There's been several existing at the same time. Saatchi bought it in 1987, and he's had it on show since 1991 in various venues, but I've made it around the world, from as far away as Australia, Japan, through to Saddam Hussein's Red Jail in Soleimania in northern Iraq. So it's kind of an interesting piece. This was the incarnation at the Saatchi Gallery, and you can see exactly what it's doing. It's just a tank that follows the topology of the room. This was Melbourne City Art Gallery, National Museum I should say, and that blue strip there is the skylight, where you suffer the vertigo and people feel as if they're falling out into space. About transforming the room, you use a material that's been through its own transformation. This has been a million years underground, it comes out, it's put into a car, it's made black by the graphite, or the carbon that builds up in the engine, burning the graphite. Carbon being burnt to make graphite. And the title of the piece of work is 2050, and that's the name of the oil, a multi-grade oil that you will put in your car engine. So in a way, I use titles for these pieces, and I'll tell you the titles of all the work I've shown. And they, in a way, have to run parallel to the piece of work, so they don't give away too much, but they're like a little conundrum in themselves. So again, this was one of the interesting ones. I mean, all the other rooms were sort of, especially the museums, are quite difficult because they are these grandiose white spaces, but this was the space in County Hall. And in each work, there's a fine-tuning That does throw up problems, i.e., you know, what does one do in 2000, I don't know, 20, 50, 100 years when I'm not around to dictate how to put it in. I work with teams to build these things. I'm in there, I'm controlling it all the time. And I'm tuning them to each space. So in this one, this is the corridor, these are the windows that you can see out to the land and the sky. But then I opened this door and the oil was allowed to penetrate round to the other side. That is the oil line there. So this is illusion and this is reality, or this is reflection. And that's a clock on the wall that the builders, when they were renovating the building for Charles Saatchi, they came in one day and went up and stuck the clock in the wall. And I said, can you set that to 20 to 9? And he said, it don't work, mate. And I said, it doesn't matter, can you set it to 20 to 9? So we had this bit of an argument. But 20 to 9 is, of course, 2050. Sorry, 10 to 9. 2050. It's 8:50 p.m. or 8:50 a.m. So it's kind of little conundrums, little teasers like that, which I find are very important for each of these pieces, because most of them get built on site. They're not built in the studio. That was the last incarnation. It's now been sold to David Walsh down in the Mona Museum, Museum of Old and New in Tasmania. He's got the Charles Saatchi piece. I hold a artist's proof of myself, not an artist's proof, but an artist's version, which gives me the right to build it anywhere. So we're talking to Germany, and we're talking to a large public London gallery, actually, about the possibility of rebuilding. It's made out of a hazardous waste material. When I got the idea, I was away on holiday in the Algarve, and this was 1986, summer 86. I was talking to Matt's gallery, Robbie Glasgow, who commissioned the work. And when I come to the idea, but through drawing, I desperately needed to see it. I made everything as models, and then the drawings kind of also help. It's kind of a mental gymnastics. People go to the gym. I work, you know, I do the same with making sculpture. You know, I need to mentally get myself worked into the right frame of mind to be able to create the piece. And I cycled off into a place called Portimao in the Algarve, rummaged through some bins, and I found actually next to a bin an old shoebox, and I brought it back, had some glue, and I made this maquette, which is, you know, it's like the silverware to pass on, really, because it is priceless. Made out of a piece of rubbish, but it's actually perfect, because when I got back to London, that's what I took. That was the first maquette that I took to Robin, director of my event, to try and explain to him what it is I wanted to try and do. So that's his office, this is the space, that's his office, this is the corridor into the oil, and this is the entrance into the gallery. So he came in and around the corner and back out. 2 years later, 1989, I was invited back to that gallery, and it's very difficult to kind of work in a space where it was all solo shows, and they were all installations and supposedly mostly site-specific. And he asked me back 2 years later, and all these ghosts of other people's work and my previous one of the oil was very difficult to work with. But what I decided to do was the complete opposite of the oil, and that is, instead of making the space a much greater situation, was to excavate the window and bring it into the room and reduce the architectural or the sculptural volume and architectural volume of the space by putting the window in the middle of the room, so you had to squeeze around it, and then boxing it back to the outside world. So the outside world had grown a bit, and the inside world, full of containers, you know, architectural containers, had been altered in some way. And the method used here was to take the window and undo it very carefully, bring it into the room and box it back, using the same method as the gallery. So this, or the language of windows really, this top and bottom is a framework with panels put in like glazing, but it's actually softboard. It's a copy of the ceiling ceiling. Well, this ceiling and this floor area, or this box top and bottom, is the same as up here. And these sides are just puckered plastic, really heavy-duty plastic. So there's a fragility between inside and outside. And all you're doing is you're looking at a window. I mean, you never do that. It's like looking at your glasses or something. But of course, there is the world beyond. And, you know, how do you sell something like that? It's now with the Tate. They bought the whole, well, first of all, it was bought by the Veltkunst collection, and the Tate have now acquired it, and they have been given, not this piece of work, they've been given a right, let's say, to make a piece of work any time that I'm available. They've had all the drawings and maquettes, there was a late show film, they've got all the negatives, they've got, you know, basically they've got the project. And that's the view from the outside that no one in the visiting the work would ever see. But you can see it projects beyond the boundary wall of the architecture. So there's a little sort of spatial conundrum at play there as well. And this was my last exhibition with Matt's Gallery, the new space. No one had exhibited here before. I wanted to make a piece of sculpture that occupied not the space, but the edge of the space, because I wanted people to go in and see the new Matt's Gallery in Copperfield Road. It used to make, the factory used to make billiard tables. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to reference the history of the architecture, the reason for the architecture. And what was also interesting was outside here were two gas holders, architecture that sort of exists in the space and then goes down underground. The original idea was to get hold of a cricket pavilion and turn it upside down and set it into the floor so that the edge, you could stand at the edge of the building and look down to the ceiling. It was a kind of a remake of the oil in a way, how to look down into the ceiling of a room. We did a test hole, and I hit what's called liquid sand, which is basically a bit like when you're on the beach as a kid, you dig a hole and water starts coming in and the sides of the hole fall in. What that meant is I went and had to go and find an engineer. I went to Price & Myers Structural Engineers and spoke to Robert Myers. He came, he said, stop digging, you'll bring these columns in and the building will cave in. So it presented a challenge because the show was to open in 6 weeks. I had to reconfigure the whole idea. So I started thinking more and more about the water table itself. That's the problem. I'd have to encompass it and use it in some way. That had to be the piece of work, because that's my problem. So I then got hold of this beautiful old billiard table, and it then acquired a seventh pocket, which made the game impossible to play. The seventh pocket was a 28-inch Hepworth concrete sewer pipe that went down into the water. And then into that I put a couple of electronic paddles. So when you came into the room, there was this silence, there was the space of the room, and hovering at the very edge of the room, the surface edge of the room, was this perfection, this notion of perfection, the green table, you know, the bays, the notion of the game, the precision in the game. And yet there was this kind of murky subconscious thing going on here with the splashing of the water every now and again, intermittently. Oh, seem to have jammed. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, so that was looking down into the water. And you can see the little details where the Hepworth pipe just kisses in. So it's like the balls kissing and touching. I wanted that almost to behave sculpturally like the game. And it meant when you got to the edge, you could hear the sound, like there would be a bloop, and you would go to the edge and you'd look down. It's almost like when you see people playing. This is Niigata Prefecture. Anyone who's Japanese here will probably know where that is. West coast of Japan. Year 2000. Set north of Japan. Previous piece was called Water Table, by the way. Set north of Japan. And in 2000, the Japanese government wanted to invite a very interesting curator, director of a gallery in Tokyo, to look after a project in Niigata Prefecture. It was dying. The youth were moving to the cities, and the government were very worried. You know, they had 8 months of snow there. They didn't want the region to die. They had to have it rejuvenated. And Frank Kitagawa came up with this idea that he would run a 10-year project. The first year, inviting 30 artists from around the world to each make a work in the region. And hence I was given this space. But the one stipulation was that you had to have a relationship to the region. And of course, I was working very much in the gallery situation, museum situation. I was working with internal space. I hadn't really worked much outside. And I was in Los Angeles and I flew to Japan. And I visited this area and decided to accept it as a project. It's the Nakasato Junior High School. And yet I was completely stumped, and I got on the plane back thinking I'm not going to be able to come up with an idea here. But it was that journey, late at night into early morning, flying into dawn and looking at the curvature of the earth, click, 5 minutes it took to get the idea. And the relationship, working with architecture as I do as a material, what I did is I decided to build my house in Japan. But I'm not going to build my house in Japan as a house. I'm going to make it as a linear drawing, first of all. And the other thing is it's going to stand exactly as it does in London, at the coordinates that London has. Now, I don't know if I brought a drawing to show that, but basically, this is my house upside down, or my ex-house. That is the roof, that's the mansard roof, that's the front of the house, this is the base of the house. And this is the back extension, the back extension of the roof. And it's because if you take your house and you move it around the world, you know, it makes sense. If you take the house and you move it around like that, it's going to be upside down. So back to Price and Myers, 5 coordinates were measured off the North Star. We had to do it 3 times to get it right. They were called the angles of collimation, and they're the exact angles of how my house stands in Rotherhithe for SE16. And then they're pinpointed out. You put 4, obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a 5th, just to make sure you've not made a mistake, which will sit somewhere in there. Then the house is built, and it's positioned then to sit on its 4 or 5 points. And so that's the house having a relationship to me in London. And this was by chance. This is why I decided this. I really like this temple gateway, and this, of course, is the horizontals and verticals of Japan. And it'd be really lovely to build that gateway in Southwark Park one day. Arco Trent, this again is 2000, celebrating the Millennium Dome. Andrea Schlicker works with White Cube, then she was freelance curator, had done the Folkestone Triennale, invited 25 artists from around the UK to come up with ideas for the Millennium Dome site. It was going to be the North Meadow Sculpture Park. And we all put in ideas for various reasons. And Anthony Gormley and I, interestingly, both decided we didn't want to do anything within the zone of the dome. We wanted to step outside into what might be called the real space. Hence the piece is called Slice of Reality. And I conjured up this idea, if you can slice a district with a GMT line, you know, like that very interesting strip of brass that sits up by the observatory, that represents something. It's only a piece of metal, but it represents something. It represents 0 latitude. It's a timeline. So if you can divide a district through time, maybe someone, or maybe somehow, I could talk a little bit about that. In the same way as the dome was a big parcel, maybe I could talk about a parcel of space that could be seen as a parcel. And the other thing, of course, was stepping outside of that dome site was this river with no shipping on it. So here I was in Greenwich, this extraordinary blaze of history to the Navy, and yet there was nothing to the merchant seamen or the river worker or anything like that. So the idea here was in some way to acknowledge that industry as a dying industry. And so this ship I found up north, it was for sale. I was given a budget, I bought that for £12,000. Then got very frightened. And then gave it to, I was bidding in an auction, and the other person was bidding against me. I said, listen, stop bidding, I'll buy it and I'll give it to you, which he fortunately believed. And the condition of that was that he had to give me that section. And so this, initially, was supposed to stand on the GMT line as it flies across to the north of the river. Unfortunately, doing some research into that once we'd started the project, we weren't given permission because there was a threat that the piling of this, to take that 104 tonne, the piling that hold, the 6 pilings down here that hold that section of vessel, that slice of ship, the vibration might affect the Blackwall Tunnel. So we had to move 40 yards down. So it's in the zone, let's say. In the zone. And of course, parcels of space, you cut something open. It's like pulling drawers out of a, I don't know, sideboard or something, chest of drawers. You suddenly start getting these other spaces that are occupied within the retainer or container that is the sort of edge of the volumes. So it's still there today. It was never really imagined to stay there permanently. The idea was that, well, it wasn't really spoken loudly about, but the idea was that it probably rust and moved itself back into the river if it was long term. Those kind of things flag up warning signs to a lot of people, especially planners and clients and owners, because that's sort of like rubbish, messy, whatever. So one had to be very careful about how one worded these things. And as I say, at the end of the exhibition, the work was returned to me, and I decided it might be possible to leave it there permanently. Anthony Gormley had done the same thing round the corner. So I went and saw the Port of London Authority, and I bought a perpetuity licence, and it is there today. I ran it, in fact, as an office for about 5 years. It was difficult because internet was difficult then, and it was down. But it's, we used to open it for open house, and that used to be a drawing room where I would make drawings, I'd invite clients. It was a great place to invite clients, because they never ever said, "Are you sure you can do it?" Because they were already within a sculpture. I think it's the only sculpture in the world that you can go inside and work in. And this was the downstairs office. There's 4 floors to the thing. And at open house, people said, "Why don't we live here?" In fact, my son was there. It's interesting. It's interesting that you get to a stage in your career, or I got to a stage in my career where I found it was very easy to do my party pieces, and by that what I mean is you can play very safe. You know, I knew I could carry on making oil or slicing things up or whatever it happened to be. So it was really a case of like, how do I reinvent myself? How do I get to the simplest way of discovering the creative act that you don't need any training for? You just do this thing which is based around the most basic of creative acts, and it came totally by accident. We've all done it. You've washed your jeans and you found a fiver in there and it's all screwed up. You get it and you start to unfurl it. You start to pick it out. You're not trained to do that, but it's a very, very basic creative act that we all experience when we sort of, you don't want to tear it, it's worth something, and you have to, as soon as it tears, you turn around and find something else. There's an intuition that plays to make that happen. I thought, this is the sculpture. All I've got to do is find something that isn't that fiver. What I'm going to do, and I had no idea of the end result, but the idea of getting hold of something and crushing it so it's absolutely solid, and then putting it in a gallery and working with it, and this time I did it with students from UEL, going back now to about 2003. And the piece is called Butterfly, and it's about the unfurling of a Cessna-like aircraft. I bought an aeroplane, second-hand write-off, and had it crushed in a car park, which was a very, very interesting exercise, because a plane is incredibly difficult to crush. So I had to bring in 4 rodeo drivers on their massive forklift trucks, and they smashed them out of this thing, got it really into a ball. And then something very interesting happened. I had to get it to Wapping Project Space, which was about 2 miles away. And being a cheapskate, I met some scaffolders at traffic lights and leant across out my window of the car and said, "Do you want to earn a couple of bob? Can you meet me tonight? I'll pay you cash. Can you get this thing to Wapping?" I said, "Yes." And they called up, paid them, and they picked the thing up, or they grabbed it and they dragged it along the floor. And I said something really weird to them. I said, "Don't do that, you'll scratch it." And this thing is like completely mangled. But what I was trying to say to them is, it's the sculptor's hand. Don't don't affect it in your way. I don't want your touching it to affect it. I want my touching all the way through the project to the end. And it was a very interesting point, you know, of discovery for me, that thing of preciousness. Here was this twisted, mangled wreck, and there's me saying, be careful, lift it, don't scratch it on the floor. These guys just thought I was totally out to lunch, but we got it there. Whopping hydraulic pump station, so hydraulically, I put equipment, hydraulic equipment inside, from, you know, like that piece of paper. You bend a bit with a crowbar, you insert something that goes, you pump it, the hydraulics pull it out, it gets out so far, you bore a hole into it, you insert something else. And at the same time, you have these 2-ton ratchet straps on 2-ton purple strops, and we were anchoring to the building and to the aeroplane and just pulling. And of course, the thing is doing a dance in the space, turning over 3.5 weeks. With me not knowing what the end result was. I didn't know what this piece was going to be. But the public, the show had started, the public were coming in. They came in at private view, the ball was there, and then each day they came in and saw it getting bigger and bigger and wings coming out, like the caterpillar to the butterfly. So there's this sort of metamorphosis. And the metamorphosis was also in the project because this was sort of, it was like 2003, it was a clunky process of filming. I had 2 cameras up in the ceiling, and they were being worked off a massive computer. They were dictating to the 2 cameras to take photographs 24 hours of the day, every 5 minutes. So at the end of the day, we had X number of images, and then we had these big sticks at that time where you'd have to download the day because the computer was full up, and take them upstairs to a big external hard drive. And at the end of the 3.5 weeks, when the piece was like there and out, I thought it's not enough. There must be another idea in this. And suddenly the idea of putting all the images together became a very, very interesting potential, because what you're doing is you're suddenly crushing time. You know, you've crushed an object and pulled it back out, but now with all these digital moments, I was able to put them together, stretch them a bit. Every frame was ×3, and we put a 4-minute movie together. So just overnight, we worked all night, we built this 16 by 12 screen, and the aeroplane that was up in the air on one side, I went up and I cut all the strops that were holding it, and it just crashed to the floor. So it was like this spent husk, but it had given birth to something else. It had given birth to this beautiful sort of butterfly, I suppose, with all this light dancing on it from the sky reflecting in, etc. And that film just repeated itself. But it also was fantastic because it then generated a whole series of ideas from that one fiver being unfurled. The whole idea that materials, found materials like aeroplanes or, you know, this table or whatever, sculpture is very good at dealing with mass. It's very difficult to deal with time, but film is incredibly good at dealing with time, but it's not very good at dealing with mass. If you could put the two together so that you could film something sculptural and then the two were working in harmony, there was a whole potential for a series of works. So I'll go quite quickly, but I spent about 2 years just going through other pieces. This, by the way, was a recent incarnation. It's been redesigned now so that the aeroplane has this attached to it. Before, the screen was separate, it was attached to the building, but we've shrunk the screen. We shrunk the screen, and it's held by a couple of sort of little ailerons. But I did a show at the Barbican, and there were 2 films in that. This is a spinning caravan on a big rotisserie, and it's got a camera in there going round. So as it goes round, it's not a filmic idea, but as it goes round, what happens is you have a static screen that projects a film, which shows you an interior space that obviously has a poltergeist, because the doors are opening and closing, because as it goes around, it gravity, they flat, and it comes back on itself. And the plug came out into the middle of the film, because it's upside down from the sink, and it goes back again. So in here, you have a bizarre world, which is not a reality, and it's second-hand because it's been shot from this material. So that's the sculpture, this is the film, but they are working together. And then there was an Italian piece, this is called Road Movie, and this is just a Piaggio. with a pile of boxes in the back that is spun quite slowly, but there is a random movement of a camera zooming backwards and forwards here, which is literally peeling the piece of work, because as it's going backwards and forwards, it's filming a little moment, rather like a road movie would have the camera out the window, or one of those movies from a train where you just get the railway lines going. It was a fabulous idea, and an original idea that came out of this was that possibly one could take the imagery pouring out of this. It wasn't possible with the technology then, it is now, where I could then have that printed constantly on a strip of paper. So, like peeling an orange, you've changed the spherical volume of the orange into another shape. I could have printed miles and miles of the road movie, cut it up and sold it. So here you can see, you know, spinning away, and this is just like stuff zooming along. That's only fast because of the setting of the camera, of course, but you know, it was just like a fairly fast movement, and this thing is randomly, the camera is randomly moving up and down this track here. So that was my whole sort of spate of sort of film and sculpture. And then I went back to sort of looking at more commission work, where this now is back working with Mark Davey, director of Future City, piece for a piazza, and the piazza was, you know, all new development, and this is all of a certain type of architectural logic. And what I was looking at was shacks that you would find on a allotment. I went out to Barton, there's a fantastic allotment out there. And all these guys and girls there build their own sheds, and you know, it's where the rules of architecture are turned on their head. So, as we know, windows become roofs, doors become walls, corrugated iron becomes something else, a door, and all that sort of aesthetic was copied and modelled. And this is not wrong, it's just a different way. It's like chaos is just another kind of order, is what I suppose I was trying to say. It's the sort of alternative to the, it's the alternative to that. And then a whole series of architectural pieces came out. This is Holborn. Some of you might have seen this. It's a permanent work. It's the LSE, London School of Economics, and the London School of Economics. On this chamfered corner, they wanted a little sculpture, and they asked 5 artists to put in proposals. And my proposal was, why is it a chamfered corner? Why is it not a 90 degree? Why don't we just make it 90 degrees again? In fact, it would never be again, it was always that. What I did is I looked at one part of the building, a random part, and we took a strip of that and modelled it. And in Sardinia Street, that's Holborn Road, we modelled another strip. This was MDM props. And then we put those 2 strips together to form a 90 degree corner. But the 2 strips make no architectural sense whatsoever. So like all the other skins along that street, this has its own references, has its own quirkiness. And this little element here is because this chamfer was to give space to the pedestrian. I wasn't allowed to use it. So we put the model, or we put the mould, that section of mould down in the floor, bolted it in at MDF. And then we just rode up with the forklift truck and just buckled it up. Obviously there had to be a little bit of shaping from that. That was a random act, I could have just cast it, it went everywhere. So we had to pull back pieces, and that was then cast as an element, and as a way of answering the problem of, like, you can't come down onto the pavement. How are you going to deal with that? So just tear it off, break it, whatever, crush it. It was like the most informative way of doing it. Yeah, so Kingsway, Sunday Street. And it's a chameleon piece. You know, I mean, that's the real building, and this is a Portland stone powder in Jesmonite. And you can see, you know, there's like a section of window hitting another section of window. There's all sorts of peculiarities of architecture. It doesn't function as architecture. This is Folkestone Tree and Art. It's the first Tree and Art, 2010. I'll speed up here, actually. And I went down there to look around. I was invited to make a piece of work. Found out that Folkestone was dying. It's a little bit like Nitar Prefecture I was talking about. What they were trying to do is revitalise it. There was one particular person, Roger de Haan, who was putting a lot of money into Folkestone to try and rebuild it, make it a cultural centre for that part of the coastline. And so obviously, with the experience of the slice of reality not just being a formal aspect of sculpture, but it looked at things like context. Why would you want to put a ship there? Because our Commonwealth in 1936, you could get, when the King was crowned, you could sit on that part of Blackpool Point and you could watch ships, 1,000 a week going in and out to our Commonwealth. You know, going out with money and coming back with tusks or something, I don't know. But in the same way, you know, there were ferries going from Folkestone. This place was dead. The ferries were taking holidaymakers. This was like a classic example of a bit of holidaymaker activity. This is the Esplanade, and I found this extraordinary, abandoned, broken up, vandalised, crazy golf course. And I thought, that's the material that I need to work with. Designed a jig to pull certain sections out. The piece is called 18 holes. I wanted 18 pieces out of the whole thing, each with the hole from the game. So this is what I've encountered. Designed and built a jig to have these cut and then pulled out. So you've got 18 pieces. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 18 pieces make 3 beach huts. But the 3 beach huts are made from the past, and they're a way of presenting the future. But of course, they've gained their own aesthetic by being not flat and not a game and not something redundant, but something that talks about a rebirth, a rejuvenation, a reinvention of the old. And so this is like the beach huts, typical of Folkestone, and this is this sort of set of 3 weird ones. I mean, this little bit up here is bits of pavement. You know, you've got these little bits of wood that turned into metal. Another bit. And of course, there's the hole there, there's a hole there, there's a hole there. The thing had to be reglazed, grassed, of course, with the artificial lawn. Still there today. Donated, as it were. Okay, so this is now over easy. It's what Americans do with eggs. And I was invited to make a piece of work for the new, it used to be called the Dovecote Art Centre, probably no one will know that from here, it's up in Stockton. The Dovecote Art Centre was pulled down and they made this new building called the Arc, Arc Men. And Renton Howard Wood Levine, an architectural firm based in Covent Garden, were given the job of the rebuild. And I started to do something here which I've never done before, which is where I've always taken what's given. If someone says, you know, where would you, what do you want to make? And I say, well, take it to the side and I'll have a look, I'll get an idea. It's not like I do have a vocabulary of ideas, but I don't sit in the studio and sort of just try and invent something. I need it relating to something outside in some way. Hence, I work a lot with commission. I am now doing a little bit more in the vein of object making, but it's still in the vein of taking things that we think we know, and I can change them slightly, and therefore we have to take a double look. You know, we've got all these preconceived ideas about our world, and if I can tweak it slightly, then we have to really think about everything we've got around us. And so in this situation, I said the building is the sculpture. What we'll do is I'll work with the engineers, we'll design an 8-metre bearing, and we'll just take the building. It's a art centre. Unfortunately, it didn't have a gallery, but it did have a music centre, a theatre centre, 3 bars, a health spa, dance space. So it was pretty much live performance that was going on there. So in a sense, the building had to be a flag-waving piece to talk about that in some way. It had to describe what was going on inside. When I came to the architects, they said, listen, it's very ambitious, too ambitious for us. We won't carry the warranties on that. That means they can't ensure that's going to work, because they'd get sued by the client. That was all thrown at me. I threw it at the engineers who were big fans. And so margins, you know, not physical margins, but sort of margins were drawn down the edge of the building. We were given that section of building as Richard Wilson and Price and Mine structural engineers, and we worked how all this would work, how it would turn, how it would look, how to stop the ingress of dust and wet weather getting in, and how to stop heat getting out. So a very, very interesting exercise. I mean, I'm not an architect, never trained as an architect, but so what happens is this turns 300 degrees. So I suppose the word turn is wrong. It oscillates 300 degrees. And what it does is, when that sits with that and runs up and it's actually meeting that, it's just the normal surface of the wall coming down, and the curtain walling here and the brise-soleil all line up. When it clicks on, it goes round and up and it comes back down. So what is opaque becomes transparent. What was then transparent becomes opaque, and you can see in the building and out the building the building performing. To the passerby in the street, she sees something very differently each time they pass. But this led on to another piece of work. This is 2007. Well, it's actually, opened in 2007, but we started this in 2005. Yates's Wine Lodge in Liverpool. I had an idea about 8 years before I made this piece of work that came out of the piece being made for what was, the Arc, what was the Dovecote Art Centre. One evening I was working on a maquette, and I had like the Arc brise-soleil window, and I laid it as a model, and I laid it on the table, and I went to glue a spindle on it so I could turn it. And when I came back in the morning, the spindle had turned over and it stuck at an angle. And it's one of those beautiful happy accidents that happen in the studio where you pick it up and you go, God, what's happened there? Oh yeah, the glue. And then suddenly the light bulb goes on and you think, my God, there's an idea in this. What happened is, because the spindle moved approximately 50 degrees, it means it does what a plate will do if you spin it on a table. It gets to a point where it wobbles, which gave birth to an extraordinary sequence of our models and drawings, where I proposed for the Year of Culture, Capital Year of Culture 2008, that what we do is we spin the facade in some way. Like turning or oscillating over easy. This piece was called Turning the Place Over. It's what villains do if they break in, but it's also about what you might want to do if you don't like rules. You want to turn them upside down. You don't want to accept what you're told all the time. You're not happy with that because you can't go forward. If someone tells you something, you have to look at whether it's right or wrong. And that's what I do. I always think, well, do I want to do that, really? And so what you do is, it's not rebellion. What you have to do is you challenge the norm to push things forward. So the idea was here, like, what an ugly building. It's derelict. How do they get derelict? The context is that no one wants to use it, people have been moved out, the city was dying. And here is a building which is an eyesore. Get rid of it. Well, with the power of art, particularly sculpture here, what you can do is you can get an audience from all over the world to come and look at this thing. And all you're doing is you're turning it, but that's what happened. Almost every architectural magazine around the world wrote about it. I had up-team interviews in television over the year. And various articles, interestingly, in art magazines around the world, although they declared architecture, a lot of the writers couldn't see that it was sculpture at work. And I think it's that problem that certain sculptors have when they play with architecture, that they think you're an architect. I'm not sure why that is, but it's only a material. So what you do is you take out the facade, you crane up all your equipment, you take out a 26-ton of facade, you've got to build a coat hanger to put it back, you've got to have electric machines that are going to spin that facade on that spindle, and that's the coat hanger. And then what happens is you have to leave enough gap. I think we had 50 mil between the static of the building and the rotating piece. So this was switched on, we'll go straight to the film. This was switched on, not in 2008, it was switched on in the summer of 2007 as a flag waving piece. So the word Liverpool started to go into the country's psyche, so it was on news, television, that kind of thing. And all it was doing is it was doing revolutions all day. So this is 26 ton between the 3rd, 4th and 5th floor, which is allowed to turn around. So again, it's the impenetrable barrier of stone and glass, which is then opened up so you can see inside. And of course, it became like the Selfie Center. I in fact made a wonderful film. My partner's filmmaker, and she and I bolted all her two of her cameras on that. So they went out into the sky, down to the ground, and into the building and out the building. And they sit together as a film, which is quite extraordinary. It makes you feel quite queasy actually watching it. At the private view, remember this is Yates's wine lodge, or was. A guy came up to me and said, there's a lot of people who saw that building doing that before you did it to it. When they staggered out there. Which I thought was a really nice thing to say. I had an email today. I've just given permission to, I don't know why they asked my permission, but they want to pull the building down. It's been sold, and I had an email to say, could I get my permission, because my sculpture will be destroyed. So it's quite interesting. But I'm also talking to the Middle East about the possibility of building this in a new building. So it was fun. Again, that's pulled down. Yes, it's precious, but it's precious as memory. You know, I always believe that lovely thing, you should have been there. It's like Rachel White-Reed's house. It got pulled down after 3 weeks. You know, you should have been there. So I'm going to speed up, because we've only got 10 minutes. But that's turning the place over. That sort of linked through, interestingly, from a city of culture to the cultural Olympiad projects that happened in the regions around Great Britain. 2012, we were the centre for the Olympic Games, and I was asked by the late director Alan Hayden if I'd be interested in doing the second rooftop project for the De La Warr Pavilion down at Bexhill-on-Sea. Anthony Gordon had done the first one out on the piazza area, placed his figures there. I thought I didn't want to use that space. He's used it. I need to find another space. And I was looking again formally at the building, the cantilevered window here, you know, that kind of conundrum of stress and balance that took place with that Mendelssohn building. Union Jack up here. And I became really excited about the edges of the building, actually, and thought, in some way, I need to talk about the building and declare its edge, like the coach on the precipice in that film, you know, The Italian Job. And I fought with a lot of ideas about how to do that. In the end, I thought, well, I can just make the coach and sort of do something as a replica to sort of play off, A, the fact that the coach was red, white and blue. So take the flag down, and that becomes our national flag during the Olympics. In the film, they were going for gold, you know. So our Olympiads were going for gold. But it was also that other wonderful thing, like an Olympic athlete is going to win or lose, and an artist like yourselves, you know, whenever you're working on an idea, it might work or it might not. You don't know. You've got to test it. You've got to do all sorts of things with it. So in a way, I like that uncertainty that sort of, on the one hand, hints at the end of the pier ride, you know, up, down, whatever. But it's also about something to do with being brave about playing with ideas. And it's just using a classic, iconic moment in a British film on a classic, iconic building. The building becomes the pedestal for this piece of work. It was hydraulically driven every day. We had the Mini Cooper Club of Great Britain arrive. We played the film here. We had all sorts of festive moments with that piece of work. And more recently, it went to the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong, curated by Tim Marlowe, the art director at the Royal Academy. He had a 3-year invitation project each year. I was the first one. Second one was Craig Martin, and the most recent one, Conrad Shawcross. So getting permission in Hong Kong, I mean, it is the city of high-rise. Getting permission to do that was quite extraordinary, but we could only bring it in overnight. We could only bring in the tallest crane overnight and manage to fix, not a Union Jack, but a replica coach onto the Peninsula Hotel. And again, it became sort of one of those pieces that travelled around the world, because you had, like, this is only a few, but there were hundreds of people standing and, again, doing that selfie thing with the coach. Well, which I don't really do, but an interesting story. Eddie Izzard sponsored the piece of work. I met him at Alan Hayden's funeral. And he's been a big supporter of the De La Warr Pavilion over the years. He's not a Bexhill boy, but he worked at the De La Warr Pavilion. And at the wake, I went over to him, just had a bit of a chat about how good it would have been to have done the piece, this, that, and the other. And he asked how much I needed, and I told him. And he said, well, let's do it. And he was filmed up, not here, but up at the Bexhill on Sea when he carried the torch through Bexhill. So it was interesting. But what he said to me when we had a meeting one day, I drove down and had a meeting about press, and he's Instagram, he's got 6.5 million followers, and we were talking about, you know, how can we do this, what do we do, how do we pay for that, because money was getting a bit shy for magazine coverage and stuff. And he said, well, listen, why don't I just advertise for you? If I press this button now, 6.5 million people around the world will see what's going on. And he just clicked it to the film. And it was amazing that it just went viral, it just went everywhere, which is a wonderful thing to have. Okay, I'm going to finish up with this one. This is called Slipstream. Previous one, of course, was called Hang On A Minute, Lads, I've Got A Great Idea. So, last piece of work, for anyone who's been to Terminal 2, the Queen's Terminal, that opened a couple of years ago, this is a piece of work that's commissioned to be just outside of the terminal in a zone which is now government policy for any new airport to be built. It's a sort of safety zone. Don't have to sort of evaluate that or elaborate on that. But it's an area that separates the public and traffic and transport from the terminal itself. And the piece of work, obviously in some way, had to deal with how, had to in some sense reference the airport. It was a competition, five artists from around the world invited, and then 5 were shortlisted. We were interviewed, and I proposed this particular piece of work, which is actually not a flying aeroplane. It's a small stunt aircraft that I've gone and filmed or photographed outside of London. It's owned by Paul Bonham. He is the 3-time Red Bull world champion. And we photographed he's got 2 aeroplanes. We photographed his now redundant aeroplane. It's no longer legal for the racing. And put that into the wonderful virtual world of the computer and threw it. And by that I mean sort of just pick it up and throw it. We didn't fly it. We didn't do that with it. It tumbled. Now if you imagine, this is a fictitious scenario, you imagine having the turbine ball of tape, you fill it up with butter, and then what you do is you pick up an aeroplane and you just chuck it, and then what you do is you take the turbine ball and you tip it up and you pour plaster into the hole that aeroplane is made. That's what we made, that's what we did. I'm an empirical player. What I did is actually that. I got hold of vats of margarine, I had a metal aeroplane made, and I was heating it up and I was pushing it down and twisting it. It was very, very limited, but when I managed to get the plaster cast out, what was going on there, I could get a certain shape. I could then go to the engineers and say, this is what I want, because they designed something to fly. And I said, you've got it all wrong. And I put an aeroplane in a hamster ball, and I rolled it on the floor. And I showed them the plaster, and I said, that's what I want. And it was all back to the drawing board. But that's me working empirically. I couldn't make that as a model. It's far beyond my scope of perception on how things overlay each other as they work 3D, as they go forward, how the tail comes around and goes into the wing coming down. It actually came out of a previous idea. This gives you a sense of scale. I love these drawings that you see. It's a bit like the Princess Mary on the side of Cheops pyramid. You know, you have an Airbus A400, you have the Richard Wilson sculpture, you have I think 8.5 or 9.5 buses. It tells you how big it is. It makes absolute sense to everybody looking at it. That's how big. You don't say, well, it's 77 metres. This is a tumbling car that we're working on, again for another project. That's the car there. It's been thrown, it's tumbling. It's not hits. It tumbles, it hits the ground, it tumbles, and you make that in cast or in aluminium. You look at casting it actually. But it's a movement of a car in space. It's not crashing, it's got hasn't got any history, it's not hit anything. It's just arrived, it moves and it stops. So, you know, in terms of justification of these things, it's very important that the artist is able to deliver scenarios to sort of explain these bits. But that was a piece that I was working on when I was invited to put in for the Heathrow piece. And that's what we came up with. It's 77 metres long, it's 78 tonnes. The reason for the weight is we're actually bridge building. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 18 metres. So we've got to get cantilever at either end, and we've got to get between these three as well. So the engineers had to go into bridge building to make it, to be able to then take this scenario of a twisting and unfurling an aeroplane, a twisting and curling aeroplane. This is a journey, you know, like you get on the plane and you get off there. You get on, the world is like that. You get off there, the world is like that. And in between there is a journey, and that's what happens coming up to departures, coming out of arrivals. As you walk along, the whole piece is undulating and moving with you, and you're up in the air with it. So it made absolute logical sense. And people said to me, why does it have to be so big? Interesting question. The size of anything made in sculpture I do is relative. That's not to say I don't believe that a thimble can be as a sculpture in size. Or a whisper like a shout, you know, that sort of thing. They're both relevant. It's just that in this situation, it's got to fit in the space. It was longer. I shrunk it down. There are 11 columns that we could use to put our sculptures on. And I've only used 4. So in actual fact, it's not big, but it's right for the space given, if you see what I mean. It sits between 2 bridges. There's more space down there out to the runways. And there's more space up this way back to the other entrances. So it sits properly in its setting. Nighttime. Oh, I won't go any further. Okay, I think that's it at this time. We're 5 past, so. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. You know, I mean, I've probably said it all, but One question I'm always asked is, what is your favourite space? You know, is it Saatchi Gallery, is it Mocha Los Angeles? It's funny how people refer to spaces as favourite. Say, all the examples that you get are to do with museums. And I say, I'll tell you the best spaces I've exhibited in. The spaces that let me do what I want to do. They're the best spaces. I don't care if it's a museum or it's an unknown space. And I work a lot still with sort of young galleries because I know they're urgent about making their space work, and they're also on it 24/7. You can go to some museums and you'll meet directors and they'll hand you the technical team and you're working for like a month or 3 weeks or whatever it happens to be, and then you open and there's, you know, it's all fun and games, but the directors and the chief curators are 6 months, a year down the line still dealing with other stuff, so they have to go off and do stuff. And I quite like it when you're working with people who are there constantly and you're there intrigued by it all. So the spaces that let you do what you want to do are the best spaces to show it.
It's all fantastic.
It's not a question. Thank you very much.
How deep is the oil? How deep is the oil?
Interesting question. There's 2 answers to that. As deep as you want it to be. But in Japan, I say deeper than thought. You'll lose an umbrella in the first metre. That helps.
This is a bit more question, but how did you go about making work before you got all the financial backing? So how did you start out kind of getting into this scale of work, things like that?
The tax man called me. I had to do something. And I looked at that commissioning world. I had a debt to pay. And I realised that if I could win a commission, it would be a good down payment. So I forgot what the first piece was, but I did a piece of work that paid the debt off. And I thought, this is interesting, because I was working in an area where I had been a sculptor making objects. And I was moving more and more away from object building and making spaces to put sculptures in. So I was building rooms and stuff like that. And then they became very site-specific. So commercially, I shot myself. But I was picking up a reputation because I was doing exactly what no one else was doing, like in the big 1983 two Hayward exhibitions, British sculpture. I was like the only sculptor that was known that was never in it because it was site-specific. And what I proposed was semi-dangerous. It was a big on-site casting. I built a foundry and everything. I'd done a big casting at Max Gallery. I proved it could be done. But the whole health and safety thing kicked in and cancelled it. So I knew that commercially I was at a problem end, but I'd found a niche that no one else was going into because, you know, Kapoor and Deacon and Cragg and everyone else at Listen Gallery were making serious money from 83 on. And I wasn't making serious money, but I could if I went to the commissioning world. And so I developed that as a way of sort of going and making a career. But of course it meant you became reliant on it in a funny way, because I'd moved so far away from object building, I didn't have that reputation. I was known as someone who could guarantee something structurally daring and very, very large. And so the phone would ring on those pieces, and I could then travel and, you know, do that. I'm now, I mean, I'm not showing these, that was Annalie Judah Gallery show, beginning of the year. I'm moving back part of the practice into making smaller objects. I'm opening a show next week in Baku, 2 works. And I'm doing a show in a gallery which I work with every now and again. I haven't done a show for about 8 years there. Gallery Fumagalli in Milan, and they're all small object-based pieces. But really, I see the object-based pieces as just maquettes for larger proposals. So, you know, I've taken one object and cut it all away, so it's very, very elegant and spinal. But that's what I wanted to do to a much larger object. You know, if I could chisel away at a building before it falls down and leave just the bare minimum, what would that look like? So you just, you know, you take that and you cut it all away, so it is only wafer thin. It's that sort of play that's been, I call them maquettes, they're not, they're just small pieces.
Oh yeah, I didn't see it.
Hi. It feels like vision is a really important part of your work, and your ability to envisage something before it's been, I guess, like all art, but it feels, I don't know, it feels particularly relevant. Do you find you need to work with other people who are visionaries in that way, or do you tend to need to work with people who are kind of just plotters and doers?
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't work all the time with teams, but I do on the large pieces. I can't make these works. I can't make a slipstream. I can't compute the form of slipstream. What I do is a bit like what I said earlier was I have to go through the whole mental gymnastics role to get the idea. When I've got the idea, I then have to do something else which people find a bit confusing. I then have to fine-tune it, and that means we can all get ideas, but to get it to sit right, it needs a lot of struggle and hard work. And I think it's probably in my art training in the 70s, early 70s, at Hornsey College of Art, and there was no discussion about commercialism, like how much is it? It was like, what's it about? And what happens to it? You know, how does it function in the world when there's so much other rubbish and junk? Why is that not rubbish and junk? And so you were constantly having to mentally justify why you'd put that there. And it became very interesting because what it meant is that you became someone who could scrutinise. That education meant you could really look into reasons. Some people hid behind the reasoning and the justification, but I was someone who loved stuff, you know, just keep doing that all the time and playing with things and looking at them. And oh, look at that, you know, tearing or whatever. And so that's what the studio is about. Sometimes I work with people in there, sometimes it's completely on my own. At the moment I'm on my own. I'm on a big project, there will be people coming in. But the people I do work with are certainly engineers. If I need the thing to stand up in the world, and I need to get it safe so it's not going to fall on someone's head, and then I'm suddenly sued, imprisoned or whatever, I have to guarantee it's safe, and that's not that the aeroplane ain't going to fall down on anyone, or the piece at Sardinia Street and Kingsway isn't going to come off the wall. So you need engineers, and also you need fabricators, and you need riggers, and you need installation teams, and you need transporters. You know, to get that piece from Hull down to London, 23 sections on 2 lorries overnight on deadlines, and if they were late, it was a £400 fine because we had to come across the runways. And when the runways close, that lorry's got to find somewhere to park. It pays the fine to park, and it pays another fine, a waiting fine as well. So one's constantly at meetings dealing with that whole complexity of how to coordinate an operation. I'm not in charge of it, but I'm in at the middle of it, and I feel it's important for me as a sculptor to do that. One, so that I show care, that it's my baby, it's my thing. But the other one is that I'm part of a team, and I can't be seen to be aloof and outside of that. And there are artists who I know, because I've heard fabricators talk. There are artists you never see. There are artists who don't even have the idea. I'm the opposite. I need to be there all the time. The guys who built that, there were 82 people in total was the team for Slipstream, of which about 22, 23 were CSI, Commercial Systems International, and I knew everyone by their first name. And that was important for them, you know, and I would talk to them about the world, and talk to them about pop riveting and just the kind of gloss that we needed to get, and you know, I think they learned something about themselves, and I learned something about me as we collectively did that, and that was important. You know, but it is an isolated experience in the studio. You know, I'm pretty good with my own company. You know, I can sort of work all day and forget to eat and stuff like that, and then go out and have a damn good party or something. But if you've got people in the studio, you can't do that. You know, you've got to make sure the lavatory's clean, you've got to have food ready, you know, all those things that you don't have to bother with. But you see what I'm saying? You know, I mean, now those big studios at Gormley and Cragg and Kapoor and Hurst, the amount of money you've got to earn to keep the staff there and pay the insurances, and they've all got to have break time, and they've all, you know what I mean? It's a fact. I didn't go to art school to do a factory job, but I work with factories, if you see what I mean. I don't want to run a factory. It's not in my interest. It's actually cheaper for me. I don't have to insure anybody. Because, you know, when I have people in, it's casual labour, and I give them cash.
As someone who does not work in sculpture, it is like mind-boggling to me to have an idea and make it that big and put it out in the world, and it's like at that scale. Have you ever, in the process, or like after all this is said and done, sort of like looked at the thing and been like, oh my god, I really don't like that? or has time changed a sculpture for you?
I suppose I'd have, yeah, I understand that one. It's a very interesting question. I suppose I have to admit I've got favourites. And I suppose I have to admit that in certain circumstances I've done things where I haven't quite had the kick that I was expecting to get. That's not to say it's a bad work, it's just it's probably not come up to expectation. And I think that's usually when I've struggled initially with the idea. You know, I can sort of get ideas in 5 minutes and mistrust them and work with them for 2 or 3 months just to make sure it's the right idea. That's great. Or I can struggle for about 3 months with someone saying, we need, you know, in 6 weeks' time, we need a proposal from you. And I get to the 6th week and I haven't got anything. I know it's going to be a piece of work that I can make it look good, but it's not going to have that real... And I spoke years ago, a very interesting conversation with a friend's wife, and she was an architect. And I said something to her, and I said, Mary Lou, is that yours? And I said, that's not what you normally do, you know, not gonna, being kind, you know, not like, that's crap. And she said, Richard, the trouble with you artists is you think it's all got to be perfect. This is bread and butter, she said. I thought, Jesus, she's absolutely right. There are those pieces of work you do for free just to make them. And I've got a list of about 5 pieces I'm desperate to make, and I do them free of charge because I want to see them in the wild. There's other works, I won't say where, I'm working on a project at the moment, there's very good money in it. I haven't got the idea, and I've killed it. I'm just struggling and struggling. And I've got to present an idea at the end of the month. I'm under pressure. I'm not happy. I've done 3 presentations, and they've all been rejected as being not right in the situation, let's say. It was actually interesting. One of the directors said to me, the feng shui is all wrong. I just didn't know how to answer. But you do meet some interesting clients. You know, they have an idea about something they want, and you've got to, in a way, fit. And I just thought, I can get on and do this. You know, and I was trying to make a climatic condition as a sculpture and a tornado. So, you know, that seems too aggressive. So you have to kind of, but if you get kicked back each time, there's only so many ideas you can put forward. And then it gets very, very difficult. So yes, you know, I'm sort of beginning to think, I hope this works. The worst scenario is to ever think, oh, it don't matter. Because it does matter. You know, if it doesn't matter and you put crap out there, you know, that adds to that argument about public art, where people say, what's it for? All that. You're just adding to that. The idea is to make something exciting, possibly a spectacle. I know that's a dirty word sometimes, but make something that really is moving to a public. Like turning the place over. I mean, I learned at the end of 2008, the Liverpool Preservation Society had written to Heritage and said, we don't want the building pulled down. We want to keep it. We want Liverpool to buy this. The council didn't. But that's a dirty old building. There was a write-off. There was a pub. You know, Liverpool had given up on it. And then the Preservation Society are trying to save it. I think that's when things are really good. You get really high and you think, yeah, it's important what I'm doing.
Any last questions? Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.